The dust cloud swept across the horizon as Beatrice Price clutched her side, blood seeping through her fingers and staining the fabric of her once pristine blue traveling dress. The stagecoach lay overturned half a mile back, the driver and guard both dead from the outlaw attack that had left her running for her life with a bullet graze along her ribs. Through blurred vision, she spotted a lone figure on horseback approaching across the Montana prairie, and despite her better judgment, she raised her free arm to signal for help. It was August 1885, and Beatrice had left behind everything she knew in Boston to accept a teaching position in Miles City, Montana. The journey west had been uneventful until the final leg, when masked men had surrounded the stagecoach demanding valuables. A passenger's foolish attempt to draw his weapon had resulted in gunfire, chaos, and Beatrice's desperate flight into the wilderness. The rider approached cautiously, his silhouette growing clearer against the setting sun. He was tall and broad-shouldered, the brim of his Stetson pulled low over his eyes, a rifle resting across his saddle. "Miss, you hurt?" His voice carried across the distance separating them, deep and tinged with concern. "Please," Beatrice managed, her strength failing as she stumbled forward. "They attacked the stage. I'm wounded." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, crossing the distance between them with long strides. Up close, she could see the weathered tan of his face, the stubble along his jaw, and eyes the color of a summer storm. He caught her as her knees buckled. "Easy there," he said, lowering her gently to sit on the ground. "I'm Declan Zachary. My ranch is about 3 miles north. Let me take a look at that wound." Beatrice flinched as his fingers gently probed the torn fabric at her side. "It's just a graze, but it needs cleaning," he said, his voice reassuringly calm. "I need to get you to my place. Can you ride?" "I think so," Beatrice whispered, though in truth she'd never ridden anything more challenging than a placid mare in Boston Common. Declan seemed to read the uncertainty in her eyes. "Don't worry. I'll be gentle every step," he promised, helping her to her feet. "What's your name, miss?" "Beatrice Price. I'm the new school teacher from Miles City." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Well, Miss Price, you've certainly made a dramatic entrance to our territory." He helped her toward his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood patiently waiting. "This is Thunder. He's the steadiest mount in Montana." Declan lifted her with surprising ease, settling her in the saddle before swinging up behind her. His chest pressed against her back as he reached around to take the reins, his arms creating a protective cage around her trembling form. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. "I've got you. We'll take it slow." As the horse began to move beneath them, Beatrice couldn't help but lean back against the solid warmth of his chest. Her proper Boston upbringing screamed at the impropriety of such intimate contact with a stranger, but survival trumped social niceties in this harsh landscape. "The stagecoach," she murmured. "The others?" "I'll send men to check once I get you settled," Declan assured her. "How many were there?" 5 passengers, the driver, and a guard," Beatrice replied, wincing as the horse's movement jostled her injury. "The driver and guard were shot immediately. I don't know about the others. Everything happened so fast." Declan's arm tightened slightly around her waist, careful to avoid her wound. "Outlaws have been getting bolder lately. Sheriff Reed's been trying to organize a posse, but most ranchers are too busy with their own troubles." As they rode, the landscape changed subtly. Beatrice noticed fences appearing, then cattle grazing in the distance. Finally, a cluster of buildings came into view. A large main house built of logs with a covered porch, a barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. "Welcome to the Double Z," Declan said as they approached. "It's not much, but it's home." Through her pain and exhaustion, Beatrice could see it was far more than not much. The ranch was clearly prosperous, with well-maintained buildings and healthy livestock. As they rode into the yard, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on an apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her face softened with concern as she spotted Beatrice. "Martha," Declan called, "we have an injured guest. Stage was hit by bandits. Can you prepare a room and fetch the medical supplies?" The woman nodded briskly. "Right away, Mr. Zachary." She disappeared back into the house. Declan dismounted first, then reached up to help Beatrice down. Her legs buckled beneath her, and he caught her in his arms, lifting her effortlessly. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "No need," he replied, carrying her toward the house. "Remember, I promised to be gentle." Inside, the house was surprisingly refined for a frontier ranch. Polished wood floors, a stone fireplace, and furniture that spoke of Eastern craftsmanship gave the main room a sense of solid comfort. Martha reappeared. "Room's ready, Mr. Zachary. Water's heating for bandages." Declan carried Beatrice to a bedroom off the main living area. It was simply furnished but clean, with a brass bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a small dresser with a mirror. "This is my sister's room when she visits," he explained, setting Beatrice gently on the edge of the bed. "Martha will help you get cleaned up and bandaged. I'll send one of the hands to town for the doctor." "Thank you," Beatrice said, finally allowing herself to feel the full extent of her exhaustion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." His gray eyes held hers for a moment. "No need to think about that. You're safe now." He turned to Martha, who stood in the doorway. "I'll be sending Owen to check on the stagecoach and notify the sheriff. Take good care of Miss Price." After he left, Martha helped Beatrice undress, carefully cutting away the blood-stained fabric around her wound. The older woman worked with experienced efficiency, cleaning the long graze with warm water and whiskey that made Beatrice gasp and grip the bed sheets. "Nasty, but not too deep," Martha pronounced, applying a salve that smelled of herbs. "You're lucky, Miss Price. Couple inches to the right and we'd be having a different conversation." "Are you Mrs. Zachary?" Beatrice asked as the woman bandaged her side. Martha chuckled. "Lord, no. I'm just the housekeeper. Been with the Zachary family since Declan was knee-high to a grasshopper. His parents passed 6 years back. Influenza took them both within a week of each other. Left the ranch to Declan and his sister Caroline, though she's married and living in Denver now." Beatrice absorbed this information, creating a mental picture of the man who had rescued her. "He seems young to be running such a large operation." 32 this past April, Martha replied, helping Beatrice into a clean nightgown that was slightly too large. "And the ranch has been in Zachary hands for 3 generations. Declan was born to it, same as his father and grandfather before him." Once she was settled in bed, Martha brought her beef broth and fresh bread. Beatrice hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food appeared, and she ate gratefully while Martha bustled about the room. "Mr. Zachary asked me to find you something to wear," the housekeeper explained, opening a trunk at the foot of the bed. "His sister left some things here. You're about her size, though a bit taller." Beatrice nodded, her eyelids growing heavy as the warmth of the food and the safety of her surroundings began to overcome her. The last thing she remembered was Martha taking the empty bowl from her hands and saying, "Rest now, child. You're safe here." When Beatrice awoke, sunshine was streaming through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day flooded back. She shifted and felt the pull of the bandage at her side, a sharp reminder of her narrow escape. A soft knock at the door preceded Martha's entrance with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Miss Price. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Beatrice replied, pushing herself to a sitting position with a wince. "What time is it?" "Nearly 9. You slept straight through the night." Martha set the tray across Beatrice's lap. "Dr. Jenkins came by last evening. Said you were doing fine but should rest for a few days. He left some powders for the pain if you need them." Beatrice looked down at the tray laden with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee. "This is very kind, but I should be getting to Miles City. I'm expected at the school." "Mr. Zachary already sent word to town about what happened. The school board says to take your time recovering." Martha adjusted Beatrice's pillows. "The sheriff came by too. After they found the stagecoach, 2 other passengers survived besides you, an older gentleman and his wife. They're at the hotel in town. The other 2 didn't make it, I'm afraid." Beatrice closed her eyes briefly, remembering the young man and woman who had been traveling west to start a new life together. Did they catch the men who did it? Not yet, but Sheriff Reed has a posse out looking. Martha paused. Your trunk was recovered. Mr. Zachary had it brought here. It's in the corner there. Relief washed over Beatrice. Her few precious possessions, books, letters, her mother's locket, the teaching materials she had so carefully prepared, hadn't been lost. Mr. Zachary would like to see you when you feel up to it, Martha added. He's out with the hands now, but should be back for the midday meal. After breakfast, with Martha's help, Beatrice dressed in one of Caroline Zachary's calico dresses. It was simpler than Beatrice's own clothing, but comfortable and well-made. Martha brushed and pinned up Beatrice's chestnut hair, which had come loose from its usual neat arrangement during her ordeal. There now, Martha said, surveying her work, fit to receive company. When Declan Zachary entered the room an hour later, Beatrice was sitting in a chair by the window, a book from the bedside table open in her lap. In the clear light of day, she could better appreciate her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, as she'd noticed before, but now she could see the intelligence in his gray eyes and the way his dark hair curled slightly where it met the collar of his clean shirt. He'd shaved, and the strong line of his jaw gave his face a determined look that was softened by the gentle curve of his mouth. Miss Price, he said, removing his hat as he entered, it's good to see you up. How are you feeling? Much improved, Mr. Zachary, she replied, setting aside the book. I can't thank you enough for your help. He waved away her thanks. Anyone would have done the same. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her. I've been in touch with Horace Bentley, head of the school board in Miles City. He says the school term doesn't start for another 2 weeks, so there's no rush for you to get to town. That's very considerate, but I wouldn't want to impose on your hospitality. It's no imposition, he interrupted. Doc Jenkins says you should rest for at least a week, and frankly, I'd feel better knowing you were fully recovered before sending you to town. Miles City has its charms, but comfortable recuperation isn't one of them. There was something in his voice that made Beatrice look at him more carefully. You're very kind, Mr. Zachary. A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. Declan, please. And it's not kindness, just practicality. The town's boarding house for single ladies is run by Mrs. Hoffman, who's a fine woman, but keeps the place colder than a banker's heart to discourage what she calls improper thoughts. You'd freeze before you healed. Beatrice couldn't help but laugh, then winced as the movement pulled at her side. In that case, I accept your offer, Declan, but I insist on making myself useful once I'm able. I can't sit idle. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face, softening the weathered lines around his eyes. Martha would appreciate the help, I'm sure. She's been running this house single-handed since our cook quit last month. Can't find anyone willing to live this far out from town. You mentioned a sister yesterday? Caroline. She married a banker and moved to Denver 2 years ago. Comes back to visit when she can, but city life suits her better than the ranch. There was no bitterness in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. The room you're in is hers. It's lovely, Beatrice said. The whole house is. I didn't expect... She trailed off, realizing how her words might sound. Declan's mouth quirked. Didn't expect a rancher to have more than a dirt floor and cow hides for blankets? No, I didn't mean... I'm teasing you, Miss Price. His eyes crinkled with amusement. My mother was from Philadelphia. She insisted on bringing civilization with her when she married my father. The piano in the parlor, the books, the furnishings that was her influence. Please call me Beatrice, she said, feeling herself warm under his gaze. And I'd love to see more of your home when I'm able. I'll give you the tour myself, he promised, rising from his chair. But for now, I should let you rest. Martha will bring your midday meal soon. True to his word, over the next few days, Declan showed Beatrice around the ranch as her strength returned. He was patient with her slower pace, always offering his arm on rough ground and ensuring she didn't overtire herself. The Double Z Ranch covered nearly 10,000 acres, with cattle being the primary business, though Declan also raised horses. The operation employed a dozen hands year-round and more during roundup. The main house, barn, and outbuildings formed the heart of the property, with corrals, a smithy, and bunkhouse nearby. My grandfather built the original cabin, Declan explained as they walked slowly around the yard on her fourth day at the ranch. My father expanded it when he married, and I added the east wing after they passed. Beatrice was impressed by not just the size but the efficiency of the operation. Everything had its purpose in place, from the vegetable garden behind the house to the spring house that kept milk and butter cool. "You've created something remarkable here," she told him as they sat on the front porch that afternoon, watching the distant figures of ranch hands moving cattle from one pasture to another. "It's a family legacy," he replied, his gaze on the horizon. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to do something else, go somewhere else. But this land," he gestured to the rolling hills and the mountains blue in the distance, "it gets in your blood." "I can see why," Beatrice said softly. He turned to look at her then, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "What brought you west, Beatrice? Teaching can't be the only reason a Boston lady would travel so far." She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My parents died last winter influenza, like yours. I had a position at a ladies' academy in Boston, but afterward, there were too many memories. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana Territory, it seemed like a chance to start fresh." "I'm sorry about your parents," he said, his voice gentle. "Losing both at once leaves a particular kind of emptiness." "Yes," she agreed, touched by his understanding. "Did you ever consider leaving after your parents died?" "Caroline wanted me to. Sell the ranch, move east, invest the money in something less demanding." He shook his head. "But I couldn't. This place is more than land and cattle to me." "It's home," Beatrice said simply. His gaze met hers again, warm and appraising. "Exactly. Home." That evening, they shared dinner at the large oak table in the dining room. Martha had outdone herself with roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. After the meal, Declan invited Beatrice to the parlor, where a fire kept the autumn chill at bay. "Do you play?" he asked, gesturing to the piano. "A little," she admitted, "though I'm out of practice." "Would you?" "Play something, I mean. It's been silent since Caroline left." Beatrice sat on the piano bench and carefully placed her fingers on the keys. The instrument was well tuned, and she began with a simple melody, gaining confidence as her fingers remembered their training. She glanced over to find Declan watching her, firelight playing across his features, his expression one of quiet contentment. When she finished, he applauded softly. "That was beautiful. My mother would have enjoyed hearing you play." "What was she like?" Beatrice asked, turning on the bench to face him. "Strong, determined. She came west as a bride of 19, leaving behind a comfortable life for a man she'd only known 6 weeks." He smiled at the memory. "My father met her while selling horses in Philadelphia. Somehow convinced her that Montana was paradise on earth. Was she disappointed when she arrived? She said she cried every night for the first month." His smile widened. "And then one morning, she walked out to find a herd of elk crossing the valley with the sunrise behind them, and she never regretted it again." They talked late into the evening, sharing stories of their childhoods, their parents, their dreams. Beatrice found herself drawn to Declan's quiet strength and thoughtfulness. He listened intently when she spoke, valuing her opinions in a way few men ever had. As the days passed, Beatrice's wound healed, and with it, her strength returned. She began helping Martha with household tasks, feeling more comfortable as she contributed to the running of the ranch. She learned to make sourdough bread, to churn butter, and to manage the extensive vegetable garden that provided much of the ranch's food. One morning, a week after her arrival, Declan appeared at breakfast with a proposition. "I thought you might like to learn to ride today," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "Properly, I mean, not just being carried along." Beatrice hesitated. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. "Do you think I'm ready?" "I do, and you'll need the skill in Miles City. It's the best way to get around, especially with winter coming." His eyes held hers. I have a gentle mare that would suit you, and I'll be right beside you the whole time." Then yes, she decided, I'd like that very much. After breakfast, she changed into the split riding skirt Martha had altered from one of Caroline's garments. It felt strange to have fabric between her legs, but Beatrice had to admit it was far more practical than trying to ride side saddle. Declan was waiting in the corral with 2 horses, Thunder, his chestnut stallion, and a smaller dappled gray mare. "This is Whisper," he said, stroking the mare's neck. "She's steady and patient, perfect for a beginner." He showed Beatrice how to approach the horse, how to offer her palm for the mare to sniff, and how to speak soothingly to gain her trust. Then he demonstrated how to mount, holding the reins properly and using the stirrup. When it was Beatrice's turn, she placed her foot in the stirrup as instructed, but when she tried to swing her other leg over, a sharp pain in her side made her gasp and stumble backward. Declan caught her before she could fall. "Easy," he said, his hand steady on her waist. "Let me help you." Before she could protest, he lifted her effortlessly and set her gently in the saddle. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Beatrice felt a warmth that had nothing to do with her exertion. "Thank you," she murmured, adjusting her position. "Hold the reins like this," he instructed, moving her hands into the correct position. His fingers were rough with calluses, but surprisingly gentle. "Not too tight. You want to guide her, not control her." Beatrice nodded, concentrating on the unfamiliar sensations, the movement of the horse beneath her, the leather of the saddle, the strange intimacy of having this man's hands guiding hers. Declan mounted Thunder with practiced ease and rode beside her as she took her first tentative steps on horseback. The corral was large enough for them to make several circuits, and with each round, Beatrice's confidence grew. "You're a natural," Declan called, watching her posture improve. "Ready to try outside the corral?" She nodded, excitement overcoming her initial nervousness. He opened the gate and they rode out into the ranch yard, then down the path toward a meadow that stretched along a small creek. The autumn day was perfect, crisp air, blue sky, and the golden light that seemed unique to Montana. Aspens along the creek had turned bright yellow, their leaves trembling in the light breeze. "It's beautiful," Beatrice said, drinking in the scenery. "I've never seen anything like it." "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Declan admitted. "I come here to think sometimes." They stopped by the creek and Declan helped her dismount, again lifting her by the waist and setting her gently on her feet. This time, his hands lingered even longer, and when Beatrice looked up, his eyes were dark, with an emotion she couldn't name. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "You did well for your first real ride." "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, flustered by the intensity of his gaze. They sat by the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. Declan pointed out wildlife, a hawk circling overhead, deer tracks along the bank, the darting shapes of trout in the deeper pools. "Will you miss all this when you move to town?" he asked suddenly. Beatrice considered the question. "Yes, I think I will. There's a peace here I didn't expect to find." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Town has its advantages, of course. People, society, the school. But out here," he gestured to the open landscape, "there's room to breathe." "Is that why you've never married?" Beatrice asked, then immediately flushed. "I'm sorry, that was too personal." Declan didn't seem offended. "No, it's a fair question. And yes, partly. The women in Miles City are looking for shopkeepers and bankers, men who come home every night with clean hands and polished boots. Ranching is different. It's dawn to dusk, 7 days a week, and sometimes you don't see another soul for days." "It would take a special kind of woman," Beatrice agreed. "Someone who sees the beauty in this life, not just the hardship," Declan said quietly. His eyes met hers again, and this time the emotion in them was unmistakable. The ride back to the ranch was silent, each lost in their thoughts. As they approached the house, Beatrice could see a wagon in the yard and several people on the porch. "Visitors?" she asked. Declan frowned. "Sheriff Reed looks like, and that's Horace Bentley with him, head of the school board." They rode into the yard, and the men turned at their approach. The sheriff, a tall man with a bushy mustache, nodded to Declan. Beside him stood a portly gentleman in a black suit and a stern-faced woman in her 50s, wearing a high-necked dress of dark blue serge. "Declan," the sheriff greeted. "Miss Price, good to see you recovered." "Sheriff," Declan replied, dismounting and helping Beatrice down. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Mr. Bentley and Mrs. Hoffman have some business with Miss Price," the sheriff explained. The portly man stepped forward. "Miss Price, I'm Horace Bentley, president of the Miles City School Board. This is Mrs. Hoffman, who runs the ladies' boarding house where you'll be staying." "Mr. Bentley, Mrs. Hoffman," Beatrice acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her riding attire and wind-blown hair. "It's a pleasure to meet you both." Mrs. Hoffman's tight-lipped expression suggested the pleasure wasn't mutual. "Miss Price, we've come to bring you to town. School preparations should have begun days ago." "But Dr. Jenkins said she needs at least another week of rest," Declan interjected, his stance subtly protective as he moved closer to Beatrice. "Dr. Jenkins tends to be overcautious," Mrs. Hoffman replied dismissively. "And it's highly irregular for an unmarried young lady to remain as a guest in a bachelor's home. People are beginning to talk." Beatrice felt her cheeks burn. "I assure you, Mrs. Hoffman, everything has been completely proper. Mrs. Martha has been with me the entire time." "Nevertheless," Mr. Bentley said, "we feel it's best if you come to town today. Mrs. Hoffman has prepared your room, and there's much to do before school begins." Beatrice looked at Declan, whose face had hardened into an impassive mask. Of course, if you think it best." "I'll have Martha pack your things," Declan said stiffly. While the others waited on the porch, Beatrice hurried to Caroline's room to change into one of her own dresses. Martha helped her pack, her usually cheerful face solemn. "Don't you worry about what that old crow Hoffman says," Martha whispered as she folded Beatrice's nightgown. "Everyone in these parts knows Declan Zachary is the most honorable man in Montana Territory." "I know," Beatrice said, fighting back unexpected tears. "I just wish—" Martha patted her hand. "I know, dear. I know." When she emerged with her carpet bag, Declan was waiting in the hallway. He took the bag from her hands, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "I had hoped you'd stay until you were fully recovered," he said, his voice low. "So did I," Beatrice admitted. "These past days have been special to me." His eyes softened. "For me as well. More than you know." They rejoined the others, and after brief farewells to Martha, Beatrice found herself being handed up into the wagon beside Mrs. Hoffman. Declan stood in the yard, watching as the sheriff flicked the reins and the wagon began to move. At the last moment, Declan strode forward. "I'll be in town on Saturday for supplies," he called to Beatrice. "Perhaps we could continue your riding lessons?" Mrs. Hoffman made a disapproving sound, but Beatrice ignored her. "I'd like that very much." As the wagon pulled away, Beatrice turned to look back at the ranch house. Declan still stood in the yard, and even from a distance she could feel the intensity of his gaze following her. Miles City was a bustling settlement on the banks of the Yellowstone River, with several streets of wooden buildings, a few brick structures housing the bank and courthouse, and scattered residences extending outward from the commercial center. It was considerably larger than Beatrice had expected, with perhaps 2,000 inhabitants. Mrs. Hoffman's boarding house was a narrow 3-story building on a side street, painted a severe gray with white trim. Inside, the furnishings were sparse but meticulously clean, and the air held the faint scent of lemon polish and camphor. "The rules are simple," Mrs. Hoffman explained as she showed Beatrice to a small room on the second floor. "Breakfast at 6:30, dinner at noon for those who return home to eat, supper at 6. No gentlemen callers in private rooms. The parlor is available for receiving visitors until 8 o'clock only. No alcohol, no tobacco, no coming and going after 9 in the evening." "I understand," Beatrice said, surveying the room that would be her new home. It was about half the size of Caroline's room at the ranch, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small desk, and a wardrobe. The single window looked out onto an alley. "The school is 2 blocks west," Mrs. Hoffman continued. "Mr. Bentley will meet you there tomorrow morning to show you the facilities and introduce you to the students' parents." After Mrs. Hoffman left, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, feeling strangely bereft. The boarding house was clean and respectable, exactly what she had expected when accepting the teaching position. Why then did it feel so lacking after her brief stay at the Double Z? The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of desks, a pot-bellied stove, and a small raised platform for the teacher's desk. Beatrice would be responsible for approximately 30 students, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, teaching all subjects. The parents she met were mostly cordial, though clearly reserving judgment, until they saw how this Eastern lady would handle their children. Several mentioned they had heard about her ordeal and subsequent stay at the Zachary ranch, their tones suggesting mixed feelings about the propriety of the arrangement. By Friday evening, Beatrice had organized her teaching materials, planned her lessons, and memorized the names of all her prospective students. She sat at the small desk in her room, writing letters to her few remaining friends in Boston, when a knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Mrs. Hoffman. "Miss Price, you have a visitor in the parlor." Beatrice's heart leapt. "Thank you, Mrs. Hoffman. I'll be right down." She quickly checked her appearance in the small mirror, pinning a stray lock of hair back into place before hurrying downstairs. The parlor was a formal room rarely used except for visitors, with uncomfortable horsehair sofas and dated daguerreotypes of stern-faced ancestors on the walls. Declan stood by the window, hat in hand, looking distinctly out of place among the delicate furnishings. He turned as she entered, his face lighting up in a way that made her breath catch. "Miss Price," he said formally, aware of Mrs. Hoffman hovering in the doorway. "I hope you're settling in well." "Mr. Zachary," she replied with equal formality. "Yes, thank you. Please, sit down." They sat on opposite ends of a sofa, maintaining a proper distance while Mrs. Hoffman busied herself adjusting a lampshade nearby. "I came to see if you'd be available for that riding lesson tomorrow," Declan said. "I've brought Whisper to town. She's at the livery stable." "That's very thoughtful," Beatrice said. "I'd be delighted. What time would be convenient?" "I thought perhaps 10 o'clock. We could ride along the river. It's quite pleasant this time of year." Mrs. Hoffman cleared her throat. "Miss Price, remember you're expected at the Ladies' Aid Society meeting at 2. "Yes, Mrs. Hoffman," Beatrice acknowledged. 10 o'clock would be perfect, Mr. Zachary. I'll be ready." They exchanged a few more pleasantries under Mrs. Hoffman's watchful eye before Declan rose to leave. At the parlor door, he paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. Martha sent this for you." He handed Beatrice a small package wrapped in brown paper. "She said you'd mentioned wanting the recipe." Beatrice accepted the package, her fingers brushing his. "Please thank her for me. It's very kind." After he left, Beatrice unwrapped the package in the privacy of her room. Inside was a jar of Martha's apple preserves and a folded piece of paper with the recipe written in a neat hand. But beneath that was another note in a different handwriting, strong, masculine strokes. "The ranch feels empty without your presence. The piano sits silent, and even thunder seems to miss you. I find myself riding past the creek daily, remembering. Until tomorrow. DZ." Beatrice pressed the note to her heart, a smile spreading across her face. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. Beatrice dressed carefully in her riding skirt, and a blue blouse that Martha had told her brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her hair up securely and added a broad-brimmed hat with a simple ribbon. Declan was waiting outside the boarding house at precisely 10 o'clock, holding the reins of Thunder and Whisper. He wore a clean white shirt under his dark vest, and his black Stetson was set at a jaunty angle that gave him a rakish appearance. "Good morning, Miss Price," he called as she emerged. "Ready for your lesson?" "Good morning, Mr. Zachary." "Indeed I am," she replied, conscious of Mrs. Hoffman watching from the window. Declan helped her mount Whisper, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "You remember how to hold the reins?" "Like this?" she demonstrated, pleased when he nodded approvingly. Perfect. We'll take it easy today. Just follow my lead. They rode at a leisurely pace through town, attracting curious glances from Saturday shoppers. Beatrice sat tall in the saddle, determined to show she had learned her lessons well. As they reached the outskirts of town, Declan guided them toward a path that ran along the Yellowstone River. "How are you finding Miles City?" he asked once they were beyond earshot of others. "It's larger than I expected," Beatrice replied. "The people seem friendly enough, though somewhat reserved with newcomers." "They'll warm up once they get to know you," Declan assured her. "Frontier towns can be cautious with outsiders, but loyal once you're accepted." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle clip-clop of hooves on the path and the rushing of the river beside them. Cottonwoods lined the bank, their leaves beginning to turn golden in the autumn light. "I wanted to apologize," Declan said suddenly. Beatrice looked over at him, surprised. "For what?" "For putting you in an awkward position. I should have realized how it would look, you staying at the ranch. I never meant to compromise your reputation." "You have nothing to apologize for," Beatrice insisted. "You saved my life, and those days at the ranch," she hesitated, then continued more softly. "They were some of the happiest I've known in a very long time." His eyes met hers, warm and intense. "For me as well." They reached a small clearing by the river, and Declan suggested they stop to rest the horses. He helped Beatrice dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They sat on a fallen log, watching the river flow past. "Martha misses you," Declan said after a comfortable silence. "The house seems too quiet without you." "I miss her too," Beatrice admitted, "and the ranch. Mrs. Hoffman runs a respectable house, but it's not warm." Declan chuckled. "That's a charitable description. Most call it the Ice Palace." Beatrice couldn't help but laugh. "It is rather chilly. I've taken to wearing an extra shawl indoors." "Just as I predicted," he said with a grin that made her heart flutter. Their conversation flowed easily, catching up on the days they'd been apart. Declan told her about a new foal born on the ranch, and Beatrice described her preparations for the school term. It felt natural, as if they'd known each other for years rather than weeks. As they prepared to return to town, Declan helped her back onto Whisper, but this time when his hands encircled her waist, he didn't immediately let go. Instead, he looked up at her, his expression suddenly serious. "Beatrice," he said, using her given name for the first time since she'd left the ranch, "would you allow me to call on you properly? Sunday afternoons, perhaps?" Her heart soared at the formal request. "I'd like that very much, Declan." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the mountains. "Tomorrow, then? 1 o'clock?" "Tomorrow," she agreed. They rode back to town side by side, speaking little but exchanging glances that said far more than words could express. At the boarding house, Declan helped her dismount one last time, tipping his hat as he bid her goodbye. "Until tomorrow, Miss Price." "Until tomorrow, Mr. Zachary." Mrs. Hoffman was waiting in the hallway when Beatrice entered, her expression disapproving. "Miss Price, while I cannot dictate your social engagements, I must remind you that as the town's school teacher, you're expected to maintain the highest standards of propriety." "I assure you, Mrs. Hoffman, Mr. Zachary has been nothing but a gentleman," Beatrice replied evenly. "Even gentlemen can have ungentlemanly intentions," Mrs. Hoffman sniffed. "Mr. Zachary has a reputation as a confirmed bachelor. It would be unfortunate if you developed expectations." Beatrice straightened her shoulders. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Hoffman. If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for the Ladies' Aid Society meeting." In her room, Beatrice sank onto her bed, her thoughts in turmoil. Was Mrs. Hoffman right? Was she foolish to hope that Declan's interest was serious? He was established here, respected, while she was still an outsider. And yet, the way he looked at her, the warmth in his voice when he said her name, the Ladies' Aid Society meeting that afternoon proved to be an education in local dynamics, held in the parlor of Mrs. Judge Wilson, the most prominent woman in Miles City. The gathering included the wives of merchants, professionals, and ranchers from the surrounding area. Beatrice was introduced as our new school teacher from Boston and subjected to a barrage of politely intrusive questions about her background, education, and teaching philosophy. She answered with composure, aware that she was being evaluated. It was during the tea service that Declan's name first arose. "I saw you riding with Declan Zachary this morning, Miss Price," remarked Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, with studied casualness. "He rarely comes to town except for business. Mr. Zachary was kind enough to teach me to ride," Beatrice explained. "After my injury during the stagecoach robbery, he felt I should have the skill." "How considerate," Mrs. Wilson said, exchanging glances with the other women. "Declan has always been a helpful neighbor. His mother raised him well before her passing." "Such a shame he hasn't found a wife," added Mrs. Baker, the general store owner's spouse. "Not for lack of opportunities, mind you. Half the eligible young ladies in the county have set their caps for him over the years." "Caroline always said he's too particular," Mrs. Wilson commented. "Wants a woman who appreciates ranch life but has refinement too. A difficult combination to find out here." The conversation moved on to other topics. But Beatrice had received the message clearly. Declan Zachary was considered a prime matrimonial prospect, and her association with him had not gone unnoticed. Sunday afternoon arrived with agonizing slowness. Beatrice attended morning church services with the other boarding house residents, conscious of the speculative glances from townsfolk who had heard of her ride with Declan. She wore her best dress, a deep green wool, with modest lace trim at collar and cuffs, and pinned her mother's cameo at her throat. At precisely 1 o'clock, Declan arrived at the boarding house door. He had traded his usual ranching attire for a well-cut dark suit, white shirt, and string tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried a small bouquet of late wildflowers. "Miss Price," he greeted her, presenting the flowers with a slight bow. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Zachary," she replied, accepting the bouquet with a smile. "These are beautiful." Mrs. Hoffman appeared from the parlor. "You may receive Mr. Zachary in the front parlor, Miss Price. I'll put these in water for you." The parlor was already occupied by another boarder and her elderly aunt, which limited private conversation. Declan and Beatrice exchanged pleasantries about the weather, the church service, and the upcoming school term, all the while exchanging glances that conveyed far more than their words. After a half-hour of stilted conversation, Declan suggested a walk. "The afternoon is fine, and I'd like to show you the town park, if you're amenable." "That sounds delightful," Beatrice agreed, grateful for the chance to escape the confines of Mrs. Hoffman's parlor. They strolled through the streets of Miles City, Declan offering his arm, which Beatrice gladly accepted. The town park was a modest square with benches, a small bandstand, and beds of hardy perennials just beginning to fade with the season. "I apologize for the formality back there," Declan said once they were seated on a bench somewhat removed from the few other Sunday strollers. "I'd forgotten how constrained town life can be." "It's the same in Boston, only with fancier furnishings," Beatrice replied with a smile. "At least here the gossip is honest. In Boston, they smile to your face while dissecting your reputation over tea." Declan laughed, the sound warming her more than the autumn sunshine. "I've missed your perspective, Beatrice. Everything seems clearer when I talk with you." "I've missed our conversations, too," she admitted. "There's no one at the boarding house who discusses anything more substantial than the weather or the latest shipment at the dry goods store." They talked freely then, about books they'd read, places they'd seen or hoped to see, dreams they harbored. Declan spoke of his plans to expand the ranch's horse breeding program, while Beatrice shared her ideas for the school curriculum. As the afternoon light began to fade, Declan walked her back to the boarding house. At the front steps, he took her hand in his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "May I call on you again next Sunday?" he asked. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I'd like that very much." His smile was tender as he released her hand. "Until then, Miss Price." Until then, Mr. Zachary. The school term began the next day, and Beatrice found herself immersed in the challenges of teaching children of various ages and abilities in a single classroom. The youngest students needed help with basic letters and numbers, while the older ones studied algebra, literature, and history. Most of the children were eager to learn, though a few tested boundaries in those first days. Beatrice established firm but fair rules, winning their respect when she demonstrated both knowledge and compassion. By the end of the first week, even Mrs. Wilson's notoriously difficult grandson Thomas had settled into the routine. Beatrice found teaching in Miles City different from her experience in Boston. Here, the curriculum needed to be practical as well as academic. Many of the older boys would leave school to work family ranches or businesses, while the girls might marry young. She adjusted her lessons accordingly, emphasizing skills they would need in their frontier lives while still opening windows to the wider world through literature and history. The days were long and exhausting, but fulfilling. Evenings were spent grading papers, preparing lessons, and reading by lamplight in her small room. The only bright spot beyond her teaching was the anticipation of Declan's Sunday visits. Each week he arrived promptly at 1 o'clock, always with flowers or a small gift, Martha's fresh bread one week, a book of poetry the next. They would spend an hour in Mrs. Hoffman's parlor before taking a walk around town, gradually expanding their circuit as Declan showed Beatrice all that Miles City had to offer. Their third Sunday together, a sudden rainstorm caught them by surprise during their walk. Laughing, they took shelter in the covered entrance of the mercantile, closed for the Sabbath. "You're soaked," Declan observed, reaching out to brush a raindrop from Beatrice's cheek. The gesture was intimate, his fingers lingering against her skin. "So are you," she replied softly, noticing how his damp shirt clung to his shoulders. For a moment, they stood close, the sound of rain drumming on the awning above them. Declan's gaze dropped to her lips, and Beatrice found herself holding her breath, waiting. Then the church bell rang the hour, breaking the spell. "I should get you back before Mrs. Hoffman sends out a search party," Declan said, reluctantly stepping back. As October turned to November, the weather grew colder. Their Sunday walks became shorter, and they spent more time in the boarding house parlor, much to Mrs. Hoffman's evident satisfaction. Declan began bringing chess and checkers to pass the time, teaching Beatrice strategies as they played. One Sunday in mid-November, as the first snow of the season fell outside the parlor windows, Declan leaned forward over the chessboard between them. "Beatrice," he said quietly, mindful of the elderly boarder dozing by the fire across the room, "would you consider joining me for Thanksgiving at the ranch? Martha is preparing a feast, and Caroline and her husband are coming from Denver. I'd like you to meet them." The invitation took her by surprise. Meeting his sister represented a significant step in their relationship, a formal acknowledgement of its seriousness. "I'd be honored," she replied, her heart racing. "But I'm not sure Mrs. Hoffman would approve of my staying overnight at the ranch again." "I've thought of that," Declan said with a smile. "Mrs. Wilson has agreed to chaperone you. She and the judge are joining us as well. You could ride out with them Thursday morning and return Friday afternoon." Beatrice felt a rush of affection at his thoughtfulness. "Then yes, I'd love to come." Thanksgiving Day dawned bright and cold, with fresh snow covering the ground. Beatrice rode with Judge Wilson and his wife in their enclosed carriage, listening to Mrs. Wilson's stories about the early days of Miles City, when she had been one of only a dozen women in the settlement. The Double Z looked even more welcoming than Beatrice remembered, with smoke curling from the chimney and evergreen boughs adorning the porch railings. Martha greeted them at the door, enfolding Beatrice in a warm hug. "Look at you," Martha exclaimed, holding Beatrice at arm's length. "Town life agrees with you, but we've missed you something fierce around here." Inside, the house was filled with delicious aromas and the sound of conversation from the parlor. Declan emerged to greet them, his face lighting up when he saw Beatrice. "You're here," he said simply, taking her hand in his. "She certainly is," Mrs. Wilson observed with a knowing smile, "and looking very well indeed." Declan led them into the parlor, where Beatrice was introduced to Caroline Zachary Turner and her husband Edward. Caroline was a feminine version of her brother, tall and striking, with the same gray eyes and dark hair. "So you're the school teacher who's captured my brother's attention," Caroline said warmly, embracing Beatrice. "I've heard so much about you in his letters." "All good things, I hope," Beatrice replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Positively glowing reports," Caroline assured her with a wink. The Thanksgiving meal was a joyous affair. Martha had outdone herself with roast turkey, venison, and all the traditional fixings. Judge Wilson carved, and Edward Turner offered a heartfelt grace before they ate. Conversation flowed easily around the table, with stories and laughter shared freely. Beatrice found herself seated between Declan and Caroline, who regaled her with tales of their childhood on the ranch. "Declan was always the serious one," Caroline told her. "Even as a boy, he carried the weight of the ranch on his shoulders. Father used to say he was born responsible." "Someone had to balance your mischief," Declan retorted good-naturedly. After dinner, while the others retired to the parlor for coffee, Declan asked Beatrice if she'd like to see how the ranch had changed since her last visit. They bundled up in warm coats and stepped outside into the crisp afternoon. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked toward the barn. Inside, it was warm and fragrant with the smell of hay and horses. Thunder nickered a greeting from his stall, and Whisper poked her head over her gate, obviously recognizing Beatrice. "She's missed you," Declan said as Beatrice stroked the mare's velvet nose. "I've missed her too," Beatrice admitted, "and everything about this place." Declan moved closer, his eyes searching hers. "Just the place?" Beatrice's heart pounded. "No," she said softly, "not just the place." He reached out, cupping her cheek with his gloved hand. "Beatrice, these past months have been the happiest of my life. When you're not here, I find myself counting the days until I can see you again." "I feel the same," she whispered. "I'd planned to wait until Christmas," he continued, "to give us more time. But I find I can't wait any longer." To her astonishment, he dropped to one knee in the hay, taking both her hands in his. "Beatrice Price, I love you. I think I've loved you since I first saw you standing brave and alone on the prairie. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Joy exploded in Beatrice's chest, so intense she could barely breathe. "Yes," she managed through tears that suddenly sprang to her eyes. "Yes, Declan, I love you too." He rose and gathered her in his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with the months of longing they'd both suppressed. His arms tightened around her waist, and she wound hers around his neck, pressing closer as the kiss continued. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Declan rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that weeks ago," he murmured. "Mrs. Hoffman would have had apoplexy," Beatrice replied with a laugh. "Worth it," he said, stealing another quick kiss. They returned to the house hand in hand, their happiness evident to all. Caroline squealed with delight when they announced their engagement, throwing her arms around both of them. Martha wiped tears from her eyes, and Judge Wilson proposed a toast to the happy couple. Later that evening, after the Wilsons had retired to the guest room and the Turners to Caroline's old room, Declan and Beatrice found a moment alone in the parlor. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a gold ring set with a modest diamond flanked by two smaller sapphires. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman who loved the ranch as much as she did." "It's beautiful," Beatrice said, admiring how the stones caught the firelight. "And I do love the ranch, Declan. I love everything about this life you've built." "We'll build more together," he promised, kissing her once more before reluctantly bidding her good night. The next morning, as Beatrice prepared to return to town with the Wilsons, Declan pulled her aside for a private goodbye. "I've been thinking," he said, holding both her hands in his. "The school term ends in 3 weeks for Christmas break. What would you say to a Christmas wedding? Caroline and Edward are staying through the new year." "So soon?" Beatrice asked, though her heart leapt at the idea. Too soon? He asked, suddenly uncertain. She shook her head, smiling. No, not too soon. Christmas would be perfect. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Miles City. Mrs. Hoffman received the announcement with pinched disapproval, though she was careful not to criticize the town's most prosperous rancher openly. Others were more enthusiastic, especially the Ladies' Aid Society members who immediately began planning a wedding shower. The 3 weeks before Christmas passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice continued teaching while also preparing for the wedding and her move to the ranch. Caroline stayed in town to help with arrangements, and the two women quickly formed a deep friendship. You're exactly what Declan needs, Caroline told her as they selected fabric for Beatrice's wedding dress. Someone who appreciates his strength but brings out his joy, too. I haven't seen him smile this much since we were children. The wedding was set for Christmas Eve at the town's small church, with a reception to follow at the Double Z. Judge Wilson would officiate, and Martha insisted on baking the wedding cake herself. On her last day of teaching before the Christmas break, Beatrice's students surprised her with handmade cards and small gifts to celebrate her engagement. Even Thomas Wilson had carved a small wooden heart with Miss Price plus Mr. Zachary inscribed on it. Will you still be our teacher after you're married, Miss Price? Asked little Sarah Baker, her eyes wide with concern. For the rest of this school year, yes, Beatrice assured her. After that, we'll see. Perhaps I can teach at the ranch for the children who live too far to come to town daily. The idea had been forming in her mind for some time, a small school at the Double Z for the children of ranch hands in neighboring homesteads. She'd discussed it with Declan, who enthusiastically supported the plan. The night before the wedding, Beatrice stayed with the Wilsons, as tradition dictated she shouldn't see Declan until the ceremony. Caroline helped her prepare, arranging her hair and assisting with the final fitting of her wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. Are you nervous? Caroline asked as they sat by the fire in the Wilsons' guest room. A little, Beatrice admitted. Not about marrying Declan, that's the easiest decision I've ever made, but about being a rancher's wife. It's so different from the life I imagined for myself. Caroline squeezed her hand. You'll be wonderful at it. And Declan doesn't expect you to become someone you're not. He loves you exactly as you are. I know, Beatrice said softly. That's what makes him so extraordinary. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow that made the town look like a Christmas card. The small church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and candles flickered in every window. Beatrice stood in the church vestibule, her arm linked with Judge Wilson's, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father. Through the partially open door, she could see the church filled with familiar faces, her students and their parents, members of the Ladies' Aid Society, ranch hands from the Double Z, and even Mrs. Hoffman, looking slightly less disapproving than usual. And at the altar, waiting for her, stood Declan. He wore a black suit with a silver brocade vest, his dark hair neatly combed, his face solemn but eyes alight with love as they met hers across the distance. The organ began to play, and Judge Wilson patted her hand. Ready, my dear? Yes, Beatrice replied, her heart full. I'm ready. She glided down the aisle, her eyes never leaving Declan's. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and the warmth of his touch steadied her trembling fingers. You're beautiful, he whispered as Judge Wilson began the ceremony. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish one another for all their days. When Declan slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hand was steady, but his eyes glistened with emotion. By the authority vested in me, Judge Wilson proclaimed, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Zachary, you may kiss your bride. Declan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife for the first time. The reception at the Double Z was a joyous celebration that continued well into the night. The house was transformed with greenery and ribbons, and tables groaned under the weight of Martha's cooking. There was dancing in the parlor, with furniture pushed back to create space, and a fiddler from town playing lively tunes. As the evening waned, guests began to depart, leaving with well wishes for the newlyweds. Finally, only family remained: Caroline and Edward, Martha, and a few trusted ranch hands who were like family to Declan. "Time for us to retire as well," Caroline announced with a meaningful glance at Edward. "We'll see you in the morning. Not too early, of course." Martha hugged them both, tears in her eyes. "I'm so happy for you, my dears, so happy." Then they were alone, husband and wife, standing in the parlor where they had first played the piano together months before. "Mrs. Zachary," Declan said softly, drawing her into his arms, "do you know how long I've waited to call you that?" "Tell me," Beatrice murmured, melting against him. "Since that day by the creek, when you understood why I could never leave this land." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "You saw what others never did, that this isn't just property to me. It's my heritage, my future." "Our future," she corrected, twining her arms around his neck. His kiss deepened, and Beatrice responded with all the love she'd held in check during their courtship. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I should warn you," Declan said, his voice husky. "I've never shared my room with anyone before. It might take some adjustment." Beatrice smiled up at him. "We'll figure it out together. And remember your promise when we first met?" He looked puzzled for a moment, then understanding dawned, and his expression softened. "I'll be gentle every step," he quoted back to her. "I know you will," she whispered. "I trust you completely." Hand in hand, they climbed the stairs to begin their life together. The years that followed were filled with both joy and challenges. The Double Z prospered under their combined stewardship, with Declan's knowledge of ranching complemented by Beatrice's organizational skills and fresh perspective. She started a small school for the children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders, holding classes 3 days a week in a converted bunkhouse. Their first child, a son they named James after Declan's father, arrived 11 months after their wedding. Martha declared him the spitting image of Declan as a baby, with the same serious gray eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. 2 years later, their daughter Elizabeth was born during a spring blizzard, with only Martha and Declan to assist. She had Beatrice's chestnut hair and determined spirit, evidenced by her lusty cries that could be heard even over the howling wind. By their 5th wedding anniversary, the ranch had expanded to include additional grazing land to the north, and the horse breeding program had gained national recognition. Declan's carefully selected bloodlines produced mounts prized by the cavalry and wealthy Eastern buyers alike. Beatrice continued teaching until their 3rd child, another son they named William, was born. After that, with 3 young children demanding her attention, she focused on raising her family and managing the ranch household, though she still tutored individual students who showed particular promise. Life on the frontier remained challenging. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, harsh winters that tested their endurance, and occasional conflicts with rustlers or land-hungry neighbors. But through it all, Declan and Beatrice faced each challenge together, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. On their 10th anniversary, a significant snowstorm kept them homebound for 3 days. With the children entertained by Martha and the young ranch hand who had married Caroline's former maid, Declan and Beatrice found themselves with rare time alone. They sat before the fire in their bedroom, Beatrice leaning back against Declan's chest as his arms encircled her waist. "Any regrets?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About leaving Boston? Taking on this life?" Beatrice turned in his arms to face him. At 38, Declan was even more handsome than when they had met, with silver threads beginning to appear at his temples and laugh lines around his eyes, evidence of a decade of happiness. "Not one," she assured him, tracing the beloved contours of his face with her fingertips. "This life with you, our children, This land, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. When I found you that day, wounded and alone on the prairie, Declan said, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm, I had no idea I was finding my future. I think perhaps we found each other exactly when we were meant to, Beatrice replied. When we were both ready to recognize what we'd found. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms before the fire, Declan and Beatrice were warm, secure in the knowledge that whatever storms life might bring, they would weather them together.